We are Australian.
4 police officers killed in a horror crash east of Melbourne. A senior Ruby Princess doctor questions why sick passengers were allowed to disembark in Sydney. The race for a vaccine, human trials to start later this week. And veterans and their families find new ways to mark Anzac Day at a distance. Hello, I'm Yvonne Yong with ABC News. Victoria Police is mourning the deaths of 4 officers in a horror freeway crash tonight. It's the largest loss of police life in a single incident in Victorian history. Reporter Amelia Turzon has more from the scene on the Eastern Freeway at Kew in Melbourne's inner east.
Well, the Police Commissioner has detailed what is an incredibly sombre night here for Victoria Police. What he's told us is that this afternoon, about 5:30, 2 police officers have pulled over a Porsche as it was speeding along this freeway. Now, the police officers have decided to impound that person's car, and they've called along 2 other police officers to the scene to help them out. Now, while those police officers and the driver of that vehicle was standing on the freeway, a semi-trailer has driven into the group of them, killing those 4 police officers here at the scene. Now, it is unclear exactly why all of this has happened, but the Police Commissioner says that this is an incredibly tragic night for the force, and it is, in fact, the most amount of police officers that have ever died at one time.
A very tragic night indeed that we're having to respond to. I believe this is the largest single loss of lives in terms of police lives lost in one incident in the history of Victoria Police. I'm not aware of another occasion when we've lost 4 Victoria Police members in one incident such as this. It's a very tragic night for Victoria Police, and again just highlights the dangers that go with doing police work.
So the truck driver, it's believed, potentially had a medical episode before or after that crash. He is now in hospital under police guard. He will be tested for blood. His blood will be tested for alcohol and drugs, but as of yet, there's been no mention of charges. Now, the driver of that Porsche who was here at the scene, he has fled on foot after this accident. So police are calling out for that person to come forward to help them with this investigation.
Amelia Turzon. Well, Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews released this statement. Tonight, 4 police officers lost their lives in the line of duty. And tonight, somewhere in our city, 4 families' hearts are breaking. Our hearts are breaking with them. We grieve alongside them, just as we grieve with every member of Victoria Police and every member of our emergency services family. In the coming days, formal investigations will tell us why, how this could possibly have happened. But one thing is already clear, though we may not yet know their names, we will always call them heroes. Victorian Police Minister Lisa Neville also shared the grief she felt when she learned of the tragedy.
There are really no words that you can adequately use tonight to express what's happened, and it is an unimaginable tragedy. I know that the Victoria Police family is really grieving tonight. I'm a small part of that, and I'm certainly hurting tonight. My thoughts and my prayers particularly are with the family and friends of our 4 police officers who lost their lives tonight. They went to work with every expectation of coming home safely. It is a dangerous job as a police officer, but we still want every police officer to come home safely to their families at night.
Well, Scott Morrison has tweeted his reaction to the fatal crash. The Prime Minister says it was awful, heartbreaking news that 4 police officers have been killed while on duty in Melbourne tonight. He says his deepest sympathies go out to their families, fellow officers and friends at this terrible time. Wayne Gatt from the Police Association of Victoria says police across the state are in mourning over the news.
Those members today, when they started their shift, came to work expecting to protect the community. That much they did do. That much we are proud of them for doing. They didn't expect, or we didn't expect, that they would lose their lives in that process. But what we saw today is a stark reminder, is a measure of the sacrifice that every police officer, every PSO makes each and every shift when they pull that uniform on, when they put that Freddie in their pocket and come to work and do ordinary things and extraordinary things at some times in an environment to protect the Victorian community. Today, four of our community have paid the ultimate sacrifice for protecting all of us.
On to other news now. A senior doctor on board the Ruby Princess says she was surprised that passengers were allowed to disembark in Sydney last month. The doctor is the first person to give evidence to the public inquiry, which began today. The cruise liner has been given official orders to leave Australian waters by tomorrow night. It doesn't leave much time for chartered flights to be organised for hundreds of stranded crew members still wanting to get off the ship. Here's crime reporter Mark Reddy.
Welcomed with a luxury hotel room, but not for long. Hours after settling in, 9 crew, including 2 Italians, were put back on a bus.
Hold on.
And under police escort, driven straight to the airport. Others got to stay the night, including Irish singer Giselle O'Meara, who tested positive for coronavirus while on the Ruby Princess.
We're finally on our way home, which is unbelievably exciting.
The repatriation continued in Port Kembla today, but it was slow, uncertain and at times confusing.
Please know we are working through all the necessary approvals to make this happen before the ship sails, but there are a number of challenges to overcome.
115 crew members from 9 countries were loaded onto buses. Some were dropped at hotels, others put straight onto planes. 21 of them are infected with COVID-19, forced to quarantine in hotels for 14 days. As more crew checked into hotels, a public inquiry began hearing evidence about the Ruby Princess debacle. One of the ship's doctors said there was no way of testing for coronavirus before the vessel docked in Sydney last month.
Because we could not analyse any samples.
But it goes without saying that you were not testing everybody on board, were you?
No.
Even though flu swabs were taken of some sick passengers, all were allowed to disembark at Circular Quay.
I was surprised that we were allowed to do that without waiting for the results to come through.
And the fact that there were still outstanding COVID-19 swabs for people on board, passengers on board that were unwell with flu-like symptoms, it was also a risk to allow those people to go out amongst the community.
I would agree with you.
With the ship given official orders to leave tomorrow, there's this warning from the Police Commissioner.
Everyone's had plenty of time to organise charter flights, including Carnival.
And some consulates, including the Philippines, are now scrambling to get stranded crew on flights before the ship finally heads home. Mark Reddy, ABC News, Sydney.
A racially motivated attack on a family home in Melbourne has been condemned by the Premier as absolutely appalling. It's the latest in a spate of ugly incidents where Chinese Australians have been targeted during the coronavirus pandemic. The Human Rights Commission has also recorded a big spike in racism since the crisis began. Elias Cleo reports.
This is the nasty message that confronted Jackson Feng earlier this week.
We feel angry. And also, we also are feeling a little bit frustrated.
A day later, he believes the same people threw rocks through his windows, terrifying him and his young family. He says he's certain of the motivation.
We are just, randomly picked up, targeted, and because we are Chinese, obviously.
Jackson Feng has now spent over $1,000 on a home security system, and he's scared to show his face because he fears for his safety.
There's no place in our Victorian community for that sort of conduct. It's just evil.
Across the country, there have been many instances of racism directed towards Asian Australians in recent weeks. In Tasmania, 2 students were vilified after offering help to a woman who had fallen over.
Where did you come from?
And in Adelaide, a Cambodian refugee was also abused.
One car drove past and started yelling that, "Oh, you Asian bring, the virus to Australia." And then he started coughing and spitting at me.
Police won't give specific figures on racially motivated attacks, but Australia's Human Rights Commissioner says 1/3 of race-related complaints over the last few months have been related to COVID-19.
Asian Australians, like anyone else, are suffering the stress and the fear and the pain that's coming through from COVID-19, and they don't deserve to be, in fact, abused additionally.
Jackson Feng agrees. He's been living in Melbourne for a decade and says he's never seen it this bad, as if times weren't hard enough. Elias Kluwer, ABC News, Melbourne.
Well, the number of COVID-19 cases in Australia is continuing to fall, while the number of people who've recovered from the virus is on the way up. There have been just 12 new cases across the country today, though sadly 3 more deaths, all in New South Wales. Now, that state had its lowest number of cases in 6 weeks. Now, Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania were the only other states with positive tests. Back on those raw numbers, it's possible that we could eradicate the disease altogether, but as Sophie Scott explains, that isn't necessarily a goal we want to achieve.
Eliminating the virus might sound like a good idea, but it's simpler in theory than in practice.
If we did lock off our borders completely, absolutely no one was allowed in the country, then theoretically it would be possible.
So experts say suppressing the virus is more realistic.
The problem with using words like elimination and eradication is that we are a non-immune population. So you have to be so sure that you've got to that point that you would need to extend your restrictions for so long.
It means Australia would still have a small number of cases to manage. Let's take the Northern Territory, for example. There have been just 27 cases. 15 have recovered, leaving just 12 people with the illness. The Territory hasn't added any cases in more than a fortnight, so when those last patients recover, the Territory will have theoretically eradicated coronavirus. But short of closing the borders forever, eliminating or suppressing the virus doesn't necessarily mean life goes back to normal.
I don't see us shaking hands for the rest of this year. I think we can perhaps use other ways to greet people.
To be safe, some businesses may need to rethink how they operate.
People who have been working from home will continue to do so if they can, to minimise a congregation of people.
Let's not forget how quickly this virus can spread. On average, one person infects another 3 people. Those 3 can go on to infect another 9. 9 can infect 27. All of a sudden, 200 people have the disease, and we're back to where we were a few weeks ago. When restrictions do ease, contact tracing and testing will need to be scaled and outbreaks quarantined. Sophie Scott, ABC News.
Well, human trials are about to begin in Britain on a vaccine in a bid to stop the COVID-19 pandemic in its tracks. Australian researchers are playing a crucial role, but scientists caution we're still in the very early stages of finding a vaccine. Bridget Brennan reports.
Under fire for its delayed response to COVID-19, the British government is now funding 2 multi-million-dollar vaccine trials.
This is uncertain science, but I'm certain that we will throw everything we've got at developing a vaccine.
Oxford University researchers will begin a safety trial on humans tomorrow.
We're also very interested to see whether or not it can prevent cases of coronavirus disease, and so that's why we need to get on and start the testing in humans.
Currently, there are more than 60 vaccines in development, with 20 countries working on trials. Australia is among them, along with scientists from Israel to Denmark, Canada to India. The vaccine being trialled in the UK passed its first hurdle at the CSIRO's Australian Animal Health Laboratory in Geelong.
The vaccine, when it was given to these ferrets, there were no adverse reactions to the vaccine, so we know that the vaccine is at least safe.
Australian researchers believe human trials will begin here this year.
These vaccines that are going into people now, there's still much more development in many more people before we're actually at the point that the vaccine is ready.
Normally, vaccine development takes years, not months.
It's right up there, top of the list in terms of urgency. So people have moved at absolute blinding speed, in my opinion.
In the long run, a coronavirus vaccine will also need to be affordable and widely available to the billions of people who need it. Bridget Brennan, ABC News.
Singapore, which had been lauded for its response to the corona pandemic, is now dealing with a huge jump in cases after an outbreak among foreign workers who live in dormitories. Now, this chart shows how the number of cases has accelerated, and the country is now having its worst week of the pandemic so far. There was a record number of cases on Monday, and more than 1,000 infections have been reported each day since then. Experts say the surge in cases shows what can happen if authorities become complacent. ABC correspondent Jake Sturmer reports.
Migrant workers underpin Singapore's construction industry. But their cramped living conditions mean highly infectious diseases like coronavirus can spread rapidly. Singapore seemed to have the virus under control, but it's been caught out.
No matter how well prepared you are, any blind spots, try and find them now.
Professor Dale Fisher and his colleagues have this week been inside the dormitories to test and treat workers. Physically distanced, these workers are being advised how to try to contain the outbreak.
The community engagement is going to be what's critical. You need to be able to tell people how to protect themselves.
Singapore's story shows how damaging one outbreak can be. While cases among these migrant workers have exploded, in the wider community, infection rates have fallen dramatically.
Things feel okay. We're still allowed to go out and exercise.
Lauren Hendry Parsons is an Australian working in Singapore and isn't too worried about the outbreak.
There's been a sense of trust in that so long as we wear our masks, stay indoors, we're going to be okay together.
But authorities fear there's a hidden number of cases they don't know about because the number of untraceable infections hasn't come down, so the lockdown's been extended until June.
I hope you understand that this short-term pain is to stamp out the virus, protect the health and safety of our loved ones, and allow us to revive our economy.
A revival that will be watched for the world over, with many countries looking to avoid a similar sudden spike. Jake Sturmer, ABC News.
Australia is taking advantage of record low oil prices to stockpile a national emergency supply of fuel. The decision's been announced as military tensions rise in a crucial maritime trading route where an Australian warship is training with the United States. Here's Defence correspondent Andrew Green.
On increasingly troubled waters, the US Navy's putting on a show of strength, joining Australian warship HMAS Parramatta for military exercises through the South China Sea. Since the coronavirus pandemic began, China's rapid military build-up in this disputed region has continued unabated, with Beijing fortifying artificial reefs and confronting other nations who claim the territory as their own.
To the Chinese, it's a big opportunity for them to stake their claims in South China Sea and make it theirs once and for all.
The strategic region's also vital for oil supplies. More than 30% of global trade in maritime crude makes its way through here. Now Australia's spending almost $100 million to create a national strategic reserve.
We are going to take advantage of historically low fuel prices.
It's a very welcome first step after years of successive Australian governments saying that there was no problem.
Security experts have long been warning Australia needs to bolster national oil supplies in case of a major crisis. Well, that's arrived, and so has the idea of a reserve. But it won't be stored here, instead kept in the United States.
Having something in the United States doesn't provide for our national interest to be protected in the way that it should.
Now the hunt is on for local storage solutions. Andrew Green, ABC News, Canberra.
Well, the US president has revealed his new immigration ban will last 60 days and apply to those seeking green cards for permanent residency. Donald Trump says pausing immigration will put unemployed Americans first in line for jobs as the country reopens. It's left some Australians living and working in the US worried they could be deported. North America correspondent David Lipson reports.
In recent years, it percolated through New York City. Now Australian coffee culture has ground to a halt.
It is one day at a time.
Cafes that haven't closed are struggling to make ends meet, so are their Aussie baristas.
A lot of staff are in really tough positions. They're either not employed at all, they're either working only a fraction of the hours or days that they would have originally.
Compounding their worries, visa uncertainty.
In order to protect American workers, I will be issuing a temporary suspension of immigration into the United States.
I sent the application off in March.
Corey Bergsted's green card application is being processed right now.
I've definitely started thinking about my exit strategy in the off chance that deportations start happening.
The president is set to sign yet another bailout package, this one worth almost $800 billion. The last round of aid for small business has already dried up. There's also $40 billion in there for coronavirus testing as the president continues to boast about America's capacity. More than 2,700 people died in the US in the past 24 hours. Yet protesters are still demanding an end to the lockdowns. The state of Georgia will allow hairdressers, tattoo parlours, gyms and restaurants to open from Monday.
That's a hard choice between making money and thinking of, the welfare of our clients.
A choice every governor is now weighing up. David Lipson, ABC News, Washington.
The keepers of the Anzac tradition are drawing on their ingenuity to overcome the biggest disruption to Anzac Day in a century. The fight against COVID-19 means there'll only be one officially sanctioned commemoration on Saturday at the Australian War Memorial in Canberra. But as National Affairs correspondent Greg Jennett reports, that won't stop veterans, servicemen and women and their relatives marking the day in their own way.
At the going down of the sun and in the morning.
Lest we forget.
She'll remember them, only in solitude this year.
I'm going to light a candle. I'm going to think about those who've brought the war home, who live in isolation every day because they can't make sense of what they've seen in war.
An Iraq War veteran, Sarah Watson, was a warrior for 15 years, came home to fight post-traumatic stress.
I just had felt like I'd let Australia down.
And for a time, lost touch with the essence of Anzac. She's rediscovered the spirit, as well as parallels between the call to arms and the communal cry to vanquish a virus.
And that really embodies what the Anzac Day spirit is all about.
Lest we forget.
Down driveways the nation over, Australians confined to their homes will somehow give their own expression to that spirit. While the monuments to mighty losses tower in towns everywhere, they'll mostly go unattended on Saturday, but tended to all the same by voluntary keepers of the eternal flame.
I'll be getting up very early in the morning. I'll be putting my uniform on. I'll be coming here and I will be observing a small ceremony.
So too at the biggest of them all, the Australian War Memorial. Its locked doors will be prized open for a select few. There'll be no organised march here or anywhere else, and although Australians may not realise it, as they go about their personal commemorations, they'll actually be stepping back another age. It took a while for the idea of an officially sanctioned National Day to evolve, especially after Spanish flu wiped out events in 1919. Finally, in 1920 it happened, and the long march through time began, bunkering down occasionally, only to advance again. Greg Jennett, ABC News, Canberra.
The The head of the Rugby Players Association has called for an independent review into the code after 11 former Wallaby captains signed a letter demanding a change in leadership. Rugby Australia announced a deficit of more than $9 million in March and could lose $120 million this year if competition doesn't resume. Catherine Murphy reports.
In 1991, Nick Farr-Jones led Australia to its first World Cup victory.
The most courageous player on the day, Nick Farr-Jones.
In 2020, he's leading a revolt against the leadership of Rugby Australia. Another former Wallaby, Justin Harrison, is also unhappy with the state of the game. He's now CEO of the Players Association and wants a review of everything from junior rugby right through to the current administration.
I would expect that an independent group of people who have the whole of game's interests as the outcome would be a good starting point.
Harrison says he wants the truth, warts and all.
Every part of the rugby ecosystem is under pressure to transform and be reviewed, and there's no one particular department that is going to be immune from an open and transparent analysis.
Rugby Australia CEO Raylene Castle argues the 60% cut to players' wages, staff cuts and financial support from World Rugby will be enough to stop the game going broke.
We're confident that with the plans we've put in place and the cost cutting that we've made and the very tough decisions that we've made, that we will be in a position to be able to work our way conservatively through this.
But those plans haven't satisfied the former captains, who worry about the code's financial situation and the absence of a broadcast rights deal for next year.
They have absolutely an open invitation to come into the Rugby Australia board, share their concerns and share some of the ideas and solutions that they have.
The 11 former skippers have yet to respond to Rugby Australia's invitation. Catherine Murphy, ABC News.
We've got a fairly active cold front moving up towards the southeastern states tomorrow. Now, this is going to trigger the potential of some showers and thunderstorms into South Australia and Victoria. We could even see some storms about the northwest of Tasmania. For the mainland, the rainfall is going to be quite patchy. It will be far more widespread in Tasmania, although it's going to take a while for it to move through to the east. It won't reach Hobart until overnight, and the eastern parts of the state will only see light falls. And away from that southeast corner, there is very little in the way of rainfall to talk about. Just a few isolated showers about the northeast tropics of Queensland, one or two about the coastal northern fringe of the Territory, and just a few about the far southwest of WA.
And that's the latest from ABC News. I'm Yvonne Yong. Do stay with us. More news after the break.
Know the story, anytime, anywhere with